It's been a little over a year since I began my YouTube channel. I officially booted it up in October of 2012, and my first video, the Rock of Ages review, went up shortly thereafter. As much as I'm surprised at how well it turned out, despite my strained inexperience really showing through, I often forget about that one in favor of a rather infamous one I released a few weeks later. I don't know how many of my subscribers have dug through my backlog enough to have come across that one, or took the opportunity to give it a watch when I brought it up in my QuickTime Events video, but those who did will know it's easily my longest video, clocking in at almost 10 minutes longer than the next longest. Some people will place that at the feet of inexperience again, but believe me, I've always had length on the mind when making these videos. As to why that video's in two parts, don't ask. It's a long and boring story. I do indulge a bit and go longer than I probably should on occasion, but the Lords of Shadow review was pure necessity. While watching over this footage again to get this video together, I'm reminded of all of the material I wound up cutting, all of the moments that I made mental notes about to come back to, but weren't enough to build into jokes or legitimate complaints. I'm reminded that my timed script for this review was close to 50 minutes before I cut all of that out. All of it bile. And yet, this game walks away with scores like 9 out of 10, 4 out of 5. I mean, Metacritic has the PS3 version at 85. 85! Who can justify that one to me? Passing grades for me went to the music and the environments. Are those elements weighted as heavily among gaming sites as review scores lead me to believe? The voice acting was repetitive and ranged from stale to annoying. The story was both nonsensical and boring. The villains meant nothing to the player, and the rapid change in mechanics were liable to give you whiplash. You know, if they didn't inspire you to put your controller through your own skull in frustration first. This game didn't even get edge grabbing right. You know which game did get edge grabbing right? Castlevania 64, the game that's lived its life only a few steps ahead of Superman 54. I know this because I've been defending the damn thing since it came out. In fact, my Castlevania video was originally supposed to be more evenly focused on Legacy of Darkness and Lords of Shadow simultaneously, contrasting the lazy game design in the former, which I'm perfectly aware of, with the modern update that the latter was supposed to be. But then I'm faced with a frustrating and clunky combat system, a glowing talking plot convenience in the shape of a horse, and a chase scene that makes the Oregon Trail ones look comprehensive. It was so gut-wrenchingly bad I had to turn it off. I couldn't even stomach the first hour of the game, and suddenly I didn't have to defend Castlevania 64 anymore. It had won. This actually postponed the debut of I Like to Video Games by about 2 months. Eventually I would get things together and release the Rock of Ages review, which I threw together hoping to tackle something a bit easier for my first time out, but for all intents and purposes, the Castlevania video was my first, as I had been writing and revising the script since day zero. While I eventually did return to Castlevania, I powered through the game naively believing that it would get better as I went, but sir, 'twas truly wishful thinking. Video games, like all artistic endeavors, will strive to start strong and leave the weaker elements to die slowly at the end, and yet there was always something so intriguing about the game. Believe it or not, I couldn't put it down. I often attributed it to the train wreck philosophy, it was so bad I couldn't take my eyes off it, and yet upon reflection that doesn't seem to be the case. I wasn't just enthralled by how bad this game was, I was obsessed with it. In my off time, I would often itch to get my fingers around a controller so I could play the thing. I would be irritated by interruptions, professional or otherwise. The damn thing had consumed me, a fact which I found especially problematic as I lost those affections almost as soon as the save was loaded. It's a strange animal, this game, carrying itself with the kind of mystique you associate with the darker Zelda titles, only to be dashed to bits as soon as the game tries to be as serious as Game of Thrones and as over the top as Devil May Cry, completely failing at both and deserving neither. And yet, underneath all of my scorn, it's possible I might see where the high review scores come from. The game is either revered or reviled in my experiences, my video garnering one of the most even-handed responses I've ever seen in the gaming community, and probably the most even-handed I will ever receive, given some of my more controversial opinions, which are sure to leak into a future video. The majority of the support I've seen from this game has, oddly enough, come from my associations in real life. Friends who have seen my videos will attempt to argue me into playing a second time so that they can prove to me that I just needed to want to like it or some claptrap, not the least of which being my roommate, whose diverging opinion on the game has been a frequent topic of discussion, and obviously, I share more than a little bit of ground with these people. My desire to keep picking up the game day after day back then is still a very real experience for me. I can recall the feeling clearly. Perhaps there is something to this. A brainless story can also be seen as accessible. A focus on graphics over game design makes for a simple to follow, pretty to look at game, and even if those sound like derisions, can we really say that much more about The Avengers or Pacific Rim, both movies that I love, but ultimately just fun, pretty, and easy to follow. I shouldn't be surprised that this game got a sequel, with a third game coming up. It sold well despite its issues, and it has a fan base. The true number 2 isn't out yet, but I'm told that the 3DS follow-up, Mirror of Fate, is noticeably worse than the original. Morbid fascination often has me thinking about trying the 3DS game, but I have less leisure gaming time than ever nowadays, and I try not to put myself through a gaming experience I know I'm going to hate unless it's for the show. Ultimately, the reason I don't bother is because I don't have a 3DS capture card, something which I've lamented in the past, but proves itself to be a mixed blessing in this case. I really don't want to play Mirror of Fate, and the only reason I would be for an episode of I Like to Video Games. Perhaps, a 1 year after video in place of this one. Regardless, I can only assume that my lack of capture card has saved me from some kind of anguish in this case, as looking at the review scores, it's pretty indicative that I've dodged it. Wait a minute. Seriously? This happened?
It's on the PSN? Ah, shit! I didn't want to play the fucking... Ah! Nope. Nuh-uh. No! See, that's the self-preservation instincts kicking in right there. And I, for one, have too much self-respect to... I'm feeling syrupy.